So, good morning everybody. Oh God, nearly knocked the moth trap over. Oh, I don't know about you, but yeah, did you get a good night's sleep? I'm a little bit stiff this morning, I must admit. My back is a tad achy. So hopefully everybody who took part in our Big Wild Sleepout had a fantastic time. I certainly did. If you didn't take part, don't worry at all. This is just a run through of our moth trap that we set during the event last night. So there was hundreds and hundreds of people, families, kids, sleeping out in their gardens last night, celebrating their nocturnal wildlife, which is a really awesome, cool thing to be doing. And part of that, and my favourite topic last night, and if you tuned in at all, you might have guessed that my favourite topic is the moths. So we set our moth trap last night. It's been running all night. Luckily the wind dropped. Yesterday evening the wind was a bit of a pain in the backside, I must admit, and was causing us a few technical issues. But it's gorgeous here this morning, the sun's shining, we're in for a fantastic day. So I'm just going to move this a little bit closer to the camera and explain what we've got going on. Also just going to lower that down a little bit. There we go. So we've got a big funnel, a bright light in the middle, and a big container which we hope is going to be full of moths. You'll see lots of egg boxes inside, which is just a convenient place where the moths will kind of live. But what is going on here, this bulb is a very special bulb. It emits lots and lots of UV light, and that's what attracts the moths. So why does it attract moths? Several reasons. Oh well, there's several theories, I must add. My favourite theory is that UV is also reflected off the moon and the night sky in general. And I think moths use that to orientate themselves and navigate around. Moths disperse all over the place. They're incredible little creatures. They can travel sometimes hundreds of miles in a night if the wind is right. They're amazing. But if you have effectively a moon on the ground, so imagine this is the moon, and there's also a moon up high in the sky, they're going to get a little bit confused and a bit baffled, and they'll start spinning around here and they fall into the trap. So what we'll do in just a second, we'll dive in and have a look at some of the species. Now there's over 2,500 species of moth in the UK, in fact well over that, and hundreds of those you could find in any old garden, as long as you've got a few trees around, a bit of vegetation. Always good to plant some native things in the garden, and you'll be amazed at what you could catch. So I'm hoping this morning's catch will be kind of a nice representation of what you could get in your own garden. So what we'll do to start with, I think, we'll probably get the camera all flipped around and we'll start going through the trap. So let me just do a little bit of fiddling with the camera. There we go. Finn's over there. You met Finn last night very briefly. He's fast asleep. So I'm going to hand over the camera to somebody else here. So let us know in the comments if there's any issues with the light and the sun. So realise the sun's coming up very, very fast. So try and keep everything in the shade so you can see exactly what's going on. So I'm just going to move this. Now don't worry if things fly off. I'm fully prepared for that to happen. There's one already, off it goes. Now very important to check the lid, always check the lid, because these are where some of the more interesting species might live. So we have, now by the way, in the comments, do keep note of some of the species we're catching and let us know your favourite ones, because moths have some fantastic names. So this one is one of the carpet moths. So they're called carpet moths because they lay really, really flat, and they're often quite wide. And this one is called the green carpet, and no surprises why. Hopefully that's coming up really nicely on the camera. That's one of my favourite spring species. They're very, very common in April into May. Now here, talking of May, this one's called the May High Flyer, which is a great name. Don't know actually why they're called high flyers, because I've never seen them flying particularly high. Maybe they do. But they certainly occur in May, and there's also a July high flyer as well, so there's a nice clue in the name. But this one's a slight example of a moth that's a little bit more brown and a little bit drabber than some of the others. Now, there's lots of myths about moths, about them being brown and drab. Now I'm hopefully going to dispel all of those myths. I'm just going to blow them out of the water this morning. But there are some species of those 2,500 which do live up to their reputation of being brown and eating clothes. but that is literally only 4 or 5 species out of 2,500. So these are all fantastic species that will be out and about pollinating and doing a very, very important job. So take the lid off completely. Wow. So in here, just have a scan around in there and see what is going on. There are lots and lots of amazing moths. Now what I'm going to do is just pick out a few particular ones to start with. I'm going to see if the odd one will get onto my finger, which would be really handy. There we go, fantastic. Hopefully you can see this one okay. Now this is a really, really interesting species. It's called a peppered moth. And fascinatingly, during the Industrial Revolution, this species almost turned black. And it's a really good example of a little bit of natural selection. So these come in pale forms and darker forms. And back when the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, everything became really dark and a bit dank and dirty with all the kind of soot and the sort of horrible stuff in the air. So the darker moths were doing much better, because if they sat on a tree and were black, they blended in. Nowadays, thankfully, the air is much cleaner. Things like lichen are more abundant on trees, and the paler version of the peppered moth has come back to life. And nowadays, I just don't see the dark version anymore. Absolutely amazing. But if you imagine that sitting on a lichen-covered log, that would be almost invisible. Right. By the way, what we're going to do is put these safe so that we can let them go after we've shown you all the wonderful species. Righty-ho. So we've got a few just common species. If there's any moth enthusiasts tuning in as well, it'd be great if there are. And I'm going to talk through some of I'll just read out some of the names that we've got here. So this little fella here is a Lychnis. And we've also got a small square spot. By the way, I hope you're taking note of some of these names. We've got the Lychnis so far, the small square spot, the peppered moth. Move this one off to the side. Now, it's not always moths that you catch in traps. And it is May after all, and look at that, that's a Maybug. We get lots of these this time of year coming into the trap as well, so it doesn't only attract moths, we get all sorts of other insects and little flies, beetles, what else have we caught in here? Probably, I think I saw a bee somewhere down here as well, but there we go, fantastic Maybug. Although, when you're sitting out near a trap watching the moths coming in, these have no sense of navigation and they come piling in at full speed, and I've had one of these whack me straight in the forehead, and I tell you, it does hurt. So I'm going to put him out the way so that doesn't happen. Okay, so what else have we got? Wonderful, right, so let's have a look at this one. This is called the light emerald. There's a whole family of emeralds, and these are the ones that actually look very much like butterflies. Now, a lot of people ask, what's the difference between a butterfly and a moth? And, the reality is that they're all basically one big family. Moths and butterflies are very, very closely related. And the only real difference that you can find in the UK is the tips of the antennae. On butterflies, they're clubbed, and on moths, they're not. And to be honest, I would argue that there's moths that are more beautiful than butterflies. Really hoping there's one or two in here just to prove that to you in just a moment. But the light emerald's a good example of one that looks very much like a butterfly. Now we've got a species that lives up to his name. Sadly, it's a little bit of a drab species. Sorry about that. But some of the names just describe what the moth looks like. And this one's called the Treble Line. And that's because it's got 3 lines on its back. So that's a really easy one to remember. So Treble Line. And for the moth enthusiast, we'll keep talking about different species. So we've got a small seraphim. What a bizarre name, small seraphim. That's tucked away in there. We've also got here a cream wave, just tucked down in here. So that's quite an unusual species to get in a garden actually, and it's because we're in quite a wooded area that we get some more unusual species. Fantastic. Right, what have we got on the back? Good grief. Right, so we've got green carpet, we remember that one. We've got here a shoulder-striped wainscot. That's a fantastic name. So the wainscots are a family of quite brown-looking species, lots of which lives in reeds and grassy areas. And this is the first one we've had this year, actually. one of the exciting things is that we keep a list of species that we catch in the garden here. And so far, that one, if I remember rightly, is about 175. That's our 175th species of the year so far. So we've also got white spotted pug, which is another unusual species that you probably wouldn't get in a normal garden. I think it's white spotted pug. I'm gonna have to go back to my books and check that later, because that's quite an unusual species. But the pugs, oh, they give me headaches. They're little, they're brown, they're often plain, very little markings, and a nightmare to identify. So here, next to one of the maybugs, we've got another carpet. So this one is called the broken barred carpet, because he's got a bar along the middle, which is broken in a few places. So how fantastic is that name? Broken barred carpet. So hopefully you're commenting on in the comments here and letting us know some of the species that you're liking so far. I can see lots of likes and things popping up, which is fantastic to see. Right, where are we going here? Whoa, one's flown off. Right, ah, I like that one. Can you see that there? Try and get the light nice and right. So this is a clouded border. I'm terrible for nicknaming moths, by the way. I come up with all sorts of my own little confusing names, which yeah, just confuse other people who moth trap. And I call this the Frisian moth, because it looks a little bit like a Frisian cow, all black and white and kind of blotchy. This is the clouded border. We've got common marbled carpets in here, more treble lines. Another peppered moth, a nice example of another pale one, not the dark one of course. And this is a great one. Let's get a good view of this. Look at that. This is a swallow prominent. Now the prominents are called prominents because of this little spike that pops up at the back there. And there's a whole range of different prominents. Usually they occur a little bit earlier in the year. We've been seeing these for a month or two here, and their numbers are starting to dwindle away. Moths generally only live a few weeks, and they all have flight times, so particular times of year you'll see certain species of moths. So all the ones we're seeing here are very, very representative of a late May catch of moths. So that's the swallow prominent. And interestingly, if I get this one, ooh, I'll put these next to each other. There you go, challenge for the camera person here. So we've got swallow prominent, which is this one. Then this one, it's slightly smaller, a little bit different, a big white wedge just below its prominent spike, and this is the lesser swallow prominent. So nice to see the two together, but actually shows some of the challenges that moth trapping throw up. There's a lot of species like this that are very, very similar, so you always have to look really carefully to see what we've got. Right, now here's some of the bigger moths. Can you see that? How's that looking on the camera? All good. So this is the Poplar Hawkmoth. So poplar as in the tree, not because he's very popular, although it is one of my favourites. It's one of the Hawkmoth species, usually the first one we see each year. And this is a common garden species. If I just put my hand near it, you can kind of get a sense of scale there. This is a big moth. I'll see if it'll happily go on my... maybe not. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. There we are. Look at that. Excellent. So this is a male. It's got a very thin abdomen. The females have a big chunky abdomen. The abdomen is this sort of bit that sticks out down the bottom. And the females would be full of eggs this time of year. So they'd be flying around looking to lay those eggs somewhere nice, presumably on a poplar tree. But this hawk moth is quite distinct. All the moths we've been seeing so far, their hind wing sits below their forewing. But on this one, the hind wing sticks out the top. And if it's ever threatened, it will display its hind wing. And can you see that there's red? I'm getting a bit upset now. I don't upset them too much. But there's a red hind wing to this species, and that'll be a warning to anything that's trying to eat him. So he'd be quite a meal for a bird or something, wouldn't he? That's for sure. So that's the Poplar Hawkmoth. And they've got very sticky feet, so I'm just going to stick into my shorts here and hopefully sort them out later. Oh, we've spotted another one in the bottom. Right, whilst we're talking hawk moths, here we go. Oh, fantastic. This is the elephant hawk moth. Can you see the similarities between the elephant and this hawkmoth? Maybe, maybe not. That's because it doesn't resemble an elephant in the slightest. It gets its name from its caterpillar. So the caterpillar looks a bit like an elephant's trunk. And it's one you often see in gardens because they're very big, they're very obvious, and they're almost the size of one of your fingers, which is... oh, there's one flying off. Oh, what is that? Ooh. Oh no, that might have been a burnished brass, that looks a bit... Oh no. Yeah, the caterpillar is about the size of your finger. You'll often see them a little bit earlier than this, wandering around on... no, actually a bit later. Let me get my time of year right. No, so these will be out laying eggs now, obviously, and then the caterpillars will be growing through the summer, and late summer you'll see caterpillars wandering around on the lawn. So these feed on willow herb, which is a weed that often grows in gardens. So it's not a weed for sure, because it's very useful to the hawkmoths. So do keep an eye out for willow herb in the garden. And they also rather like fuchsias. So I know fuchsias are a very beautiful plant, and one that you might not want to see eaten by caterpillars, but they produce amazing creatures like this. So that's the elephant hawkmoth. Right, so we're starting to get towards the bottom of the trap now. So we're getting more peppered moths. We've got flame shoulders in here. Got a bizarre namely moth. Bizarre name? Yeah, bizarre name for a moth anyway. Cetaceous Hebrew character. How weird is that? Now some of them don't have common names. If you look at this one here. So we split the moths into two. So I said there's 2,500 species. Now we have what we call macro moths and micro moths. There's no real difference between the two, it just kind of, some are smaller, so they've been put into the micro moth sort of family, rough family, and the macro moths are bigger, so they're in the kind of macro moths family. But this is a micro, and it's called Eudonia olivalis, a little species with little white dots. But it does make mothing a little bit tricky if you're new to it, because there is a lot of Latin to learn as well, but don't be put off. These are beautiful little creatures. And there's some micros which are only 2, 3 or 4 millimeters long, and you need a very good sort of little microscope or magnifying glass to even see what they are. But when you do get them nice and big in the magnifying glass, they're absolutely stunning. Right, so more hawkmoths, more poplar hawkmoths, absolutely fantastic. We've got a bee moth. That's cool. That's a micro moth actually, even though it's quite big. But bee moths are really cool. They actually live, or the larvae live, in beehives, and particularly bumblebee nests rather. So, and I've seen some of these. I've got a lot of bird boxes that I like to check through the season, and sometimes bumblebees take over the bird box. And I've seen the bumblebee larvae inside the bumblebee nests. So a very unusual lifestyle, and proves that not all the caterpillars just eat leaves. They eat a whole range of things. Some will eat even detritus and bits of... there's some moths that particularly like to live in old birds' nests, amongst all the horribleness that old bird nest, which has been full of chicks, has in the bottom of it. So very unusual. We've got scalloped hazel in here, another awesome name. We've got the silver ground carpet. Yet another name. I hope you're liking these names, by the way. Oh, and then we've got a tiny little micromoth. Oh dear. There's an example of a micromoth. I don't know if you can even see that. Is that showing up? And unfortunately, this is one that I'm not going to be able to identify. It's a little Peronic species of some sort. But occasionally I have to admit defeat and give in, because these are absolutely impossible to do just by looking at the patterns alone. So we'll put him to one side. Oh, before we do, this is a good one. This is called angle shades. If we get the angle right, in fact, what I'll try and do is see if he'll jump onto my finger. Oh, look at that. So if you look from the back end, sorry moth, we're looking up your backside, but you can see all the wing is crinkled, and that's where it gets the name that angles from, because there's all sorts of angles going on in here, and the patterns are also shaded all over the moth. But a really fancy looking species, really gorgeous. Right, we've also got, just reading out more names, we've got the Vines rustic, more small square spots, got the muslin moth, this little muslin moth in here, all fluffy, one of my favourites. Good example of how males and females look very different. So this is the male, all grey, and the females are pure white with black spots, and they fly in the daytime and not at night. So very interesting. There's a lot of species like that. The females often fly around, or the males and females fly at different times of day or night. So the emperor moth, which is one that I'm familiar with from some of the Dorset heathlands, the males fly around all day long, whizzing around, looking for females which fly at night. So they're bigger, bulkier, more vulnerable to predation, so they need to fly when it's dark. Whereas the males are much more quick, they're very agile and nimble, and off they go. See the angle shades vibrating his wings? He's getting ready to fly off. See if he wants to fly. There you go. Not, ooh, off he goes. Wonderful. Right, so we've got yet another Poplar Hawkmoth. That's 3 or 4 I think we've got so far. So not bad at all. And oh, can we get this? Oh, how do we get this on my? How's that working with the light? A little bit dark. If I shade it, does that work better? I'll actually try and get him on my finger if you're getting a good view. It might just fly off. Ooh, be very careful. There we go. Fantastic. Look at that. If I get that in the sun, can you see that shining? So this is called a gold spot, and no prizes for guessing why it's called a gold spot. You can see this one's getting ready to fly as well. So butterflies, interestingly, use the heat from the sun to warm up their bodies to fly. Moths have a different strategy, and they have much larger bodies, much chunkier bodies, and they vibrate their wings like this, which get them all the muscles nice and warm. And in about 10 or 20 seconds, this one will be flying off extremely quickly. But a gold spot, really lucky to see that. Ready, going to fly away. Almost. Oh, he's going to sit nice for us. Ah, fantastic. There we go. That's a bonus. Awesome. Right, so that's the gold spot. By the way, because we're coming to the end now, what we're going to do after this, if anybody's got any questions, post them in the comments, and I'm going to go back online once we've wrapped up our live this morning, and I can go through the comments and answer any particular queries. I'm also very conscious that last night, lots of you hopefully were trying to attract moths to your own gardens as well through the Big Wild Sleepout. So do post any pictures of things you caught for that as well, and again, I will try my very best to identify them. So we're coming to the last tray, and we've got a couple of crackers. So we'll start with this one. Another prominent. This is called the Pebble prominent. All those lovely smooth colours and the roundedness of the patterns. The Pebble prominent. This one's Latin name, I think. Am I getting this right? It's something like zigzag or something like that. Zigzag, I think it is, to be precise. And that describes the caterpillar, which is an incredibly bizarre looking creature, all zigzaggy, very angular, very different to the smoothness of the adult moth. Well, we've got more green carpets. Common pug. Let's gloss over the pugs. I mentioned those earlier on, those brown flat things. You can have a look if you like. There's one. This is the common pug with a little white spot in the middle. Green carpet, heart and dart. Don't know if you can see him in there. The heart and dart, which has got a heart shape and a dart shape. So yet another fantastic name. And I think actually we're going to wrap this up because I can hear somebody starting to do their strimming in the background in one of the neighbours' gardens. So we'll wrap up with this amazing species. This has to be one of my favourite spring species that we get. So this is the buff tip. You can see buff tip because he's got the buffy tips there. But if I had a prop, it would be really handy to have a stick, wouldn't it? But if you were to snap a twig, it would look virtually identical to this. It's one of the best species that mimic their surroundings. So a lot of these moths are quite plain in colour, they're quite cryptic looking, and basically that's to blend in with their backgrounds so that during the day, when there's lots of predators out looking, especially this time of year, there's lots of birds feeding chicks, so they need a lot of food. So the best camouflage will do you very well this time of year. So, but it also proves a point that I mentioned birds feeding their young. Caterpillars and moths are a very, very important diet to most bird species. And interestingly, in the last 40 or so years, since the 70s, moths have declined by over a third in abundance in the UK. So there's a lot less moths around now than there used to be, which is obviously going to have a dramatic knock-on effect to some of our birds as well. So positive this morning that we've seen so many different species, but nationally moths are in decline. So if you can do anything in your gardens, like planting native plants, native shrubs, native trees, to help boost moth numbers, that will be a big thing. And also they're very important pollinators. So these visit lots of flowers at night, lots of these species, and they disperse over miles and miles. So they're a very important pollinator for spreading that pollen around the different plants. So certainly as important as bees, I'd say, as a pollinator in the UK. So worrying that they're declining. So I hope you've enjoyed the buff tip there. We will leave it there. And I've got a lot of moths. I've got various Hawkmoths all over me, and you can see them down here. Got the elephant Hawkmoth and the buff tip with him as well. So I'm going to have to go and release these all safely back somewhere in the bushes. But I hope you enjoyed that. That was a fantastic catch. I'm going to get back online in just a second to go and see some of the pictures that you've been posting, hopefully. Hopefully there's lots of questions as well that I will happily answer. If you've been out with your Big Wild Sleepout, if you haven't already, go get your breakfast. I've got my my coffee here. It's not quite finished. It's still just about warm. I've been talking for too long. It's gone. Yeah, it's lost its heat. But yeah, thank you very much for taking part in the Big Wild Sleepout last night. If you didn't, thanks for tuning in this morning. And yeah, do go back and check out the Big Wild Sleepout event. There's a lot of fun activities to take part in there. Plus, we'll be saving videos like this moth one from this morning on there too. So yeah, that's it from me. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your mornings. Thank you very much.